I was hesitating to go
Right.
louder because all those frequencies are what I was hearing. Basically a bunch of stuff I don't want. Now that that's gone, it's like, oh, I can't hear the kick drum, but I can turn it up louder now. I can crank it up like that. I don't have about 6 or 7 dB, and just the cool stuff is louder now. So I'm effectively boosting the bass of that kick drum, but I actually didn't boost the bass at all. I cut out the stuff that I don't need, and now I can turn it up. And now it sounds like it's got a really powerful low note, which was always there. Okay, it was always there, but there was too much baggage. That's basically what we're trying to do with all these sounds, right? Let's look at the snare, right? On the solo, just over here, right? What I'm doing. So we can look at this, whoops, and then we can determine, like, okay, what do I not need in the snare? Or what do I need? Let's do that exercise again, right? So you can practice this on your own. We'll sweep with an EQ and try to find the parts of the snare that we do need. So let's go ahead and focus one of these parametric bands here. Let's move it down. Let's start low. That's no good. That's actually boosting the kick drum. That's bad. So I already have an inkling we're actually going to get rid of that. Let's keep going up. Oh, okay. There we're getting the resonance of the snare now. Right? We're getting the body. Right around 200. Okay. Also very common. That's why I said 200 when I mentioned snare earlier, because almost every drummer is using a 14-inch snare. So most of them are going to resonate at 200 hertz because of the 14-inch dimension. Right, so we can get that nice thud from the snare. Let's find where the high frequencies live on this one, which is going to be the stick attack. Probably around there. Right around there, not too far from there. Probably right around there. Okay. That's where I feel like I hear the stick hitting the snare. So we could say, okay, about 200 and 5K are roughly the good parts that we want to keep for our snare. Okay, and that's how you can kind of train yourself to hear those things by sweeping through the frequencies and then determining, oh yeah, that's the part of the instrument that's relevant to what I need. Okay, so in this case, as I believe we could start with a high pass filter on this to get that kick drum out of there. All right, so I can put a pretty steep slope on that and cut off, move it up until the kick drum is gone. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. So everyone hear how much the kick drum was reduced there? Alright, so here's EQ on, and when I turn the EQ off, you'll hear the kick drum is much louder. It's just the bass note part of the kick drum. Right, so we still hear some of the attack of the kick drum. Not a whole lot we can do about that, but it's not the end of the world because relative to the snare bit, it's relatively soft. Okay, so it'll just kind of blend in with the rest of the drum set at some point. Okay? And then we can determine if we need to do anything else. Right? Like, is there anything troublesome down here? Yeah. So I don't necessarily need to cut the thing, right? But like, we don't really need this range of the snare. Right? It's kind of boxy. Same thing, right? Sounds like we're inside a plastic box. I don't need that. I could decide if I want to cut that out or not. Again, preserving the stuff up here that I want, and the body that I want as well. super, super loud like that, it doesn't sound, I mean, it sounds unbalanced. But what I'm saying is because all the stuff that we don't want is coming up, where it just sounds like the snare is just much louder. That's what I mean by latitude, right? But it's not like, whoa, I can't turn it up anymore. If I wanted it to be ridiculously loud, I could, because all that baggage isn't coming with it. Right, we'll repeat this process for everything. And I'll go a little bit faster, and then I'll leave some time for questions in a moment. Let's do, this is the snare bottom. Now, again, ideally, we also want to be, it's good to make these decisions in the context of the mix. I'm soloing so we can hear clearly what I'm doing, but you can also make these decisions as you're mixing. Or sometimes it can be helpful to solo, like if I know I need to get rid of that kick drum out of the snare, right? Soloing can help me isolate it so that I can isolate the sound that I need to EQ out. Okay? So you'll notice I didn't really solo when I was compressing, except for to show you, but then with EQ, yeah, there may be times where I need to focus in and just hear the sound on its own, but nonetheless, it's also going to be in context, right? So we're going to check to make sure. So the same thing, the kick is actually really loud here because this is the snare bottom, so it's actually very close to the kick drum. Okay, so I want to cut those lows out of this snare mic. So I'll probably sing pretty strong by this scale too. There we go. That's better. There we go. Much better. Look how much lows we cut out of this snare. We don't need them. Alright, we already know for the snare, more or less we're going to need something up high, but let's just do that exercise one more time. Let's see if we can find one of those. Yeah, right? Like up there, that's kind of where those chains are. They're in the metallic part, right? Are up in this 8K range. I think I mentioned that. So, right? So that's what we want to preserve, somewhere up around 8K, and then probably also around 200 because it's the same drum. Right? So we can determine, like, hey, can I get rid of some of this stuff here? Again, by getting rid of this stuff in the middle, the 1K, 900 or whatever, just reducing it, even 560 dB, which is actually 50%, okay? We're making space for like the vocal, right? The vocal is going to be square in 1K. Right? I'll have a vocal here to demonstrate that. I was going to try to vocalize Rage Against the Machine, I made a fool of myself. But also the guitars, right? Maybe even some of that upper register of the bass might work there a little bit, okay? So reducing clutter allows other instruments to occupy those spaces. So it's not like an exercise in, EQing, it's to actually make space. Right? So like, I don't need this sound in this drum at all, right? Once again, that plastic box kind of effect, right? But that's where the vocals are going too. So I have the advantage of cutting out something that really is not going to the sound, but also going to make space for other things. And you hear that plastic, right? Much cleaner now. All right. Cool. And so on and so forth. Let's check out these overheads and see. Similar thing, right? They're kind of a little heavy in the lows. Maybe put a high pass filter maybe. Letting that out and bounce it out a little bit. So if there's something real boxy there, right, that I don't really want, that's more or less the room. At that point, kind of coming in these frequencies, right? Not very desirable. And then similar thing with I can even say, okay, the cymbals too, right? They can be a little peaky. Maybe I can cut something out of the 4K or something, which our ears are most sensitive to, like the 4K area. So that things like cymbals that can really have strong 4K presence, I tend to want to try to carve some of that out. So let's see if we can find that. that's usually about as much as I'll ever do is 3, right? But I'm just trying to get that sonically to my ear where it feels balanced, doesn't have too much of anything. And that's always my mindset. It's like, what can I take away from this, right? So it's kind of the opposite of cooking, where you're always adding something. Oh, you only put a little dash of this or reverse it. It's kind of like if you could reverse cook and just getting some stew with a million things and being like, well, let me take out some of this salt and some of this pepper or whatever. It's not possible, but that's all that's coming to mind right now. All right. So there's not too much of anything. That's my mindset here. I can hear a very distinct resonance in these room mics, a very distinct boxy resonance. All right, I'm going to locate it really quickly and cut it out. So this 328 hertz or whatever that I'm cutting out of the drum mics, that's going to make room for the bass for sure. Okay, it's going to be living down there, and so forth. Okay, same idea. This actually sounds pretty good otherwise. Take a little bit of that sharpness out of the cymbals. And so forth. You get the idea. Maybe this bass amp, right? I talked about dialing in the tone. Probably not going to do a lot. You put a lot of work into making it sound like so we can determine if there's anything that we don't need or want in there, right? It's very weird and like boxy. Okay, so on and so forth. Let's see. This would be a situation where if I wanted more lows, I could probably boost the lows on this bass too. So that's the first thing I think I've boosted so far in this whole mix. And that's because when I was recording the bass and the electric guitars, right, I mentioned that I wanted them to be really, really bright. Remember, and we heard it, right, in here. It was all out top, and that's because that's where all the harmonics, all the cool stuff's going to come from. I'd rather have all that stuff captured, and instead of the lows, because I could boost those very easily here, okay? I talked about how, especially with the mics that I use the high pass filters on, right? If there's too much lows going into the mic, okay, they're going to consume a lot of the work of the mic amplifier, right? Doing all that work to recreate those lows. But really, what I'm trying to capture is the detail, which is in the highs, right? The lows are not really detailed, so I'd rather err on the side of the sound being very, very bright and boosting the lows if I need to, like on this bass, and try to capture a ton of lows, And then the mic amplifier is going to be doing a ton of work to recreate those low frequencies, which is not where the detail of the playing is. It is the fundamental note of the instrument, but all the detail comes from all the harmonics. And when a bass player is playing, even, you know, or a guitarist, that's what they're listening to, is all the detail. They're not listening to just that bass note. Okay? It's like the guitar probably it doesn't even really need right? So maybe that guitar doesn't even need EQ. It's probably just fine the way it is, right? So now we've got our kind of now that's been influencing my decisions to some degree on the levels here, okay? But I can also check how much of that compression I want by just moving the master fader, right? So then if I do that, it's a little bit less aggressive on that limiter on the master bus, which I like. It's a little bit cleaner. It was a little aggressive a second ago. And then I just turn it down, but nonetheless, the limiter was preventing clipping. So as I was mixing, at least I wasn't fighting against clipping that was happening that was influencing my decision in a very negative way. I was just mixing. That limiting is not really going to change my perception of the EQ too much, right? It was only a few dB as well. But then I took a look at it and turned it down. You know, I could have done that a minute ago, but it's not having a profound effect because I wasn't slamming it. I was just doing some crazy mix and I wasn't checking my levels and I didn't start at -10, I might have been hitting that limiter super, super hard right now and then it would just be a disaster, right? So that's why we want to start with those kind of conservative levels, right? Have some headroom. Always think about keeping headroom. All right. Any questions about this EQ process? Wow, no question. Okay, great. So everyone knows how to do it. Yeah.
Could you explain what you just said about the limiter one more time?
Sure. So I had the limiter to prevent clipping, right? And then as I was mixing, and then now that I did all the dynamic range control, and then once I did the EQs, I turned a couple things up because I could now, because I had fixed the sounds, like the kick drum especially. I was able to bring the kick drum up a lot, and it's way more slamming now. And by virtue of turning some of the things up, like the kick and the snare, because I could now, the limiter was now actually compressing the sound a little bit. You know, I decided to ultimately just back off of it a little bit by bringing the master down a little bit, and I liked the sound of it with a little bit less limiting. But the idea is that it was preventing any clipping from happening, and that's why I want to start the mix and basically mix into it. That was kind of the gist of it, you know. So it was mixing, but if I didn't have that on there and we were just clipping the output on the master bus, we may not necessarily hear clipping because this track already has so much distortion on the guitars and the bass. We may not, you know, definitively hear clipping like crackling, but it would be influencing all our mix decisions up to that point, which would not be good. Because if we were mixing without the limiter and then made all the EQ decisions, once we put the limiter on, it's going to sound fundamentally different because we were hearing clipping. Clipping is erasing information. So once we go, oh, it's clipping, I could just also bring the master bus down so it's not clipping, but it would sound fundamentally different. Whereas with the limiter, it's not really going to sound fundamentally different.
Okay, so you kept the limiter on the whole time, but then
Yeah.
at the end after you
I just tweaked it a little bit.
then you brought the limiter down.
Yeah, I just brought the master fader down a little bit so it was hitting the compressor less. It's still hitting it a little bit because I think it sounds good, giving it that little extra compression on the whole mix. It kind of gets all the mix focused, the dynamic range of the entire mix. So we did all the individual instruments. We did a couple of subgroups like the rooms and the overheads, and then applying a little bit of compression to the whole mix does the same thing. It's taking the whole mix now and also focusing it a little bit further still. Yeah, so all those little changes give it a nice focused feeling. So now when I hear it, I hear all these loud rocking instruments. But, for example, when they break down, and then it goes to the guitar breakdown, it's not like it gets soft and I have to turn something up or adjust something. It feels very good. And then when the drums and everything comes back in, it's going to feel more powerful, but it's not going to get loud and I have to turn it down. Okay, so it's easy for me to listen to. But it's not losing any of the power or any of the energy or any of the punch at all. On the contrary, it feels punchier because we can actually hear everything. There's the no compressors. Right, so it sounded kind of more dry, a little less energetic when the compressors were off, right?
So with the drums, you didn't actually boost any frequency. What you're doing is just cutting whatever you want to.
The stuff that you don't need, yeah. Yeah, because if you tune your instrument well and you get the right tone and everything, you really shouldn't have to, it should already be there, right? Choosing the right mic, so I talked about that, right? Choosing the right mic, putting the mic in the right place, making sure the instrument sounds the way you intended for it to sound. And then at that point, yeah, we don't necessarily have to add anything. We started with what we already need, and then we're effectively just removing. The bass guitar was the one where I did boost the load, but I had talked about that specifically when I recorded it, right? I talked about I would rather capture more high end because it will be very easy for me to add lows later, and that way the lows are not tying up the mic amplifier. I don't have a choice with the kick drum to do that. I have a choice with the bass guitar and with the electric guitars to do that. Of course, the drums I don't have a choice; they just resonate at these low frequencies. Yeah. What's speakers? Sure. I mean, yeah. Generally, yeah. But generally, when I'm tracking, I try to get the sources to be pretty bright. So even if I'm choosing drums or cymbals or things like that, yeah, just choosing the sources to already be really bright, and choosing microphones that will capture those also with plenty of detail. So I used a lot of SM57s. And we talked about in class, they have a nice little bump up around 7K, which is a good high area, not like 4K, which is a bad high area, right? And so the SM57 is already kind of doing that with the with its own design, with its own sound built in. So that's a really popular recording mic. It's used on a lot of stuff. Or I used high pass filters on the drum overhead. Same thing. I already cut some of the lows out of the overheads, even though I did even more so with the EQ. So yeah, trying to do that before it even hits the interface as much as possible. And that way, when you have your stuff tracked, it's already kind of there. And then yeah, when you're mixing, sure, you could err on the side of it being bright, getting all that detail, because it'll be real easy to put an EQ on your master bus and just put a little shelf on it and get it under control, for sure. But yeah, focusing on detail, which I always make the suggestion to mix soft. That's actually going to help you with that. If you mix too loud, you're going to usually end up with oftentimes dull mixes because your ears are perceiving more high frequencies than are actually there. And then by the time you turn it down or let your ears adjust to listen to the next day soft, it might sound dark because we turn it up and we like to feel all the lows, but then we're going to mix the high softer because they're going to hurt our ears if it's loud. So yeah, it's good to mix soft. I know I'm cranking things up here pretty loud, but yeah, it's good to mix soft so that you really get a sense of how much high frequency detail is there. Cool. Any other complaints, grievances? Okay. Well, before we button up, if anybody's interested, these last few minutes, I'll play the recording with these mics, and I had a couple of spot mics too. No questions. Like I always like to say, I find that very hard to believe. Yeah. Well, our hearing actually changes as sounds get louder, believe it or not. So our ears are kind of tuned for like the human voice. So I always think of conversation level. So one way you could check is if you're playing your speakers and then you're sitting next to someone, if I can, right now I'm projecting my voice so you guys can hear me, right? But if I'm sitting next to someone talking, and if I can't hear them really clearly with my music playing, it's too loud. I should be able to hear the person talking, and it should be about that same volume. If I have to raise my voice to talk to someone next to my mix, the mix is too loud. And what that means is our ear actually hears a different frequency response as things get louder, because it's more sensitive to high frequencies and not low frequencies. As we turn it up, we start feeling the lows more, which is cool and it feels exciting. It feels like we're doing a better mix, but we're actually gonna not put enough highs because our ear is gonna be like, turn those highs down. It's giving us a false sense of how balanced the mix is. So you're gonna get a better sense of balance at conversation level. And same with your headphones too, right? So it's harder to gauge conversation level with your headphones, but nonetheless, you wanna mix at pretty low, pretty conservative levels. I mean, basically, if I was mixing just,